Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an amazing list of 18 plus some, actually, because some come in clumps, Sinfoniettas. What is a Sinfonietta? Well, it's Italian. It's the diminutive. It means little symphony. So that's what they are, little symphonies, except when they're not, and some of them aren't. I mean, it's sort of a strange thing. It can mean either smallness of size in terms of length, duration, performing forces, or lightness of heart, smallness of intent, that is, not a big, passionate statement. And some composers have used the term sinfonietta to avoid the necessity of confronting the intimidating nature of calling something a symphony, like the big kahuna, you know what I mean? So call it a sinfonietta, and then everybody will treat it, nicely, instead of saying, well, it's not a symphony like Beethoven's or symphonies. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes it makes no difference at all. And so I'm going to go down the list, as I always do, which is posted below here, so you can see it yourself, of a ton of sinfoniettas. And you can listen to them for yourself and see, are they real symphonies? Are they little symphonies? In what way are they little symphonies? I mean, the possibilities are endless. And of course, composers are ceaselessly inventive, and so here they are. They're all really good pieces. A lot of them, I might say, let's just straight off, are going to be written for smaller groups, for just string orchestra, for example. That's one reason something can be a sinfonietta, or something like that. And we'll see a lot of that. And I'm not going to make a crazy thing about it one way or another. We're just going to run through the list so that you have stuff to go and listen to, as if you don't have enough already, right? I mean, so many of you have been saying to me that I'm costing you a lot of money, and I'm so sorry for that. Well, not really. That's why I'm here, actually. My only regret is that the money isn't flowing to me. So there you go. Here we are. You ready? Penderecki. He wrote 3 sinfoniettas, believe it or not. These are later works. They're for strings plus something. One has a clarinet, or something like that, or just strings. And they're very interesting. And if you are, timid about dealing with Penderecki, who was either wildly avant-garde or neo-romantic, but in a rather gloomy and frightening way, quite often, then sinfoniettas may be a wonderful way to dip your toes in the water and get yourself started. And give it some thought. They're lovely works. They really are. They're fun. And well, I mean, I'm fun. Penderecki's almost never fun. But they are easier to digest. Let's put it that way. And, good stuff. Next, Albert Roussel. He wrote a sinfonietta. And, Roussel's music is so concise, actually, that you might think that all of it is a sinfonietta anyway. I mean, even his symphonies, they're 20, 25 minutes after the second, which is a big work. He became more neoclassical and more pointed and more, he believed that brevity and concision was a great virtue. I mean, he wrote a piano concerto that's like 12 minutes long, which is why nobody ever plays it. Stuff like that. It just got shorter and shorter and shorter. It never quite evaporated entirely, because he was far too great a composer to allow his music to evaporate. But he wrote a lot of lovely short orchestral works. That's the point, really. And they don't get played because they're short. No one knows where to program them or how. So check out his Sinfonietta. It's delicious. And after that, Britten, one of Benjamin Britten's earliest works, was a sinfonietta. He wrote it while he was still under the tutelage of Frank Bridge. It supposedly shows the influence of Alban Berg, which I don't really hear at all. It's tonal. I mean, it's harmonically, it's kind of acerbic. It's not as popular, for example, as his Simple Symphony, which is even more of a sinfonietta than the Sinfonietta, which is actually rather denser in terms of its musical content. But the Simple Symphony has the tunes, and so it has the audience, whereas the Sinfonietta gets virtually no attention whatsoever. Rather interesting, isn't it? So you can give it the attention it deserves. It shows his youthful mastery. It really does. I mean, he was a genius, of course, and even from a young age. So there you go. Next, Hindemith. Hindemith wrote something called the Lustige Sinfonietta, the jolly Sinfonietta. This is before he became a major, serious German composer and started taking on the symphony. And the Lustige Sinfonietta is actually a bigger and longer work than any of his symphonies turned out to be. It's rather funny, but it's quite early. It's very, very early. It's one of his earliest orchestral works as a professional composer. And it was only recorded, I mean, very, very recently. The past couple of decades, it was rediscovered and actually started to get a little play. It is lustige. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's somewhat tuneful. It's much more in the style of, say, Max Reger without the clotted counterpoint or something like that. It's a big, serious, happy sinfonietta, unserious symphony. I don't know what to call it. It's really a symphony. I mean, as far as the term is going to go. I suppose he could have called it a serenade if he wanted to really relax, but no, he called it a sinfonietta, and it's a lot of fun, and it doesn't sound anything like late Hindemith. So it's really kind of an experience. If you know Hindemith or if you don't like Hindemith, you want to try some of that earlier stuff, because he went through quite a few phases before he got to the Hindemith we all know and love, or don't love, whatever it is. And this is really, it was a discovery for me, I got to tell you. It really was. I have it sitting, it's actually sitting right here. Wait a minute, here's Hindemith. So somewhere in this pile of stuff is the Lustige Sinfonietta. So yeah, it's there, and it's quite enjoyable. Next, Boris Tchaikovsky. Do you know Boris? Boris has nothing to do with Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. He's a contemporary Russian composer who wrote a delightful sinfonietta for strings. Well, I mean, I'm calling all of these pieces delightful. Some of them are quite thorny and somewhat introspective. But, that's for you to determine for yourself. I mean, I'm not going to give away the game. I just want you to know that he's out there. Boris Tchaikovsky wrote some really, really good music. His Fifth Symphony is terrific, for example. And a lot of his music has been recorded. It's available and worth encountering. It really is. That whole sort of Shostakovich generation, they're all contemporaries. And as usual in the musical world, we only have time for like the top couple, meaning Shostakovich, Prokofiev, maybe a little Schnittke to spice things up once in a while. But there's a whole bunch of other ones. And they wrote symphonies, and they were serious composers. They weren't all socialist, realist hacks or anything like that. And Tchaikovsky was one of those. Boris Tchaikovsky is a very, very serious composer who wrote some really excellent music. I will be talking about some of it, I guarantee, in the future, because some of it's really marvelous. But for the time being, check out his Sinfonietta for strings. You won't be sorry. Next, Dag Wirén. Now, I talked about Dag Wirén, before. His symphonies are marvelous, and he's been on these list things. And he's such a fine composer, an impeccable craftsman, really just marvelous. He's well known, of course, for his serenade for strings, but he also wrote a sinfonietta, and like all of his music, it's like Roussel's music, actually. It goes to Sweden, you might say. It's extremely, extremely craftsmanly and refined, and not a note out of place, just really, really careful that way. And at the same time, extremely enjoyable, because the craftsmanship is all focused towards immediacy of expression, which isn't to say that he's pandering. It's just that he wanted clarity in all things, and the ability to really hear what he was doing. And you follow his thought when you listen to his music, and it's just marvelous. So then we go the other direction of Dag Wirén. Max Reger. Max Reger wrote a sinfonietta right next to his serenade. The sinfonietta and the serenade are two big, hulking, clogged up, I don't know what else to say about them. They are Well, he was not a great orchestral master, and he kind of learned how to handle the orchestra in these two works, the Sinfonietta and the Serenade. And I've talked about them before, but they are both so galumphy and not small scale. I mean, they try to be. They're trying to be. But he just loves notes, lots of notes. And he likes writing length, and he loved counterpoint, and, you know. So the Reger Sinfonietta is kind of a misnomer. But, you know, he wasn't going to write a symphony either, because that would have been about 65 hours long and you know, in 87 parts. And, you know, at least this way he got to keep it light within his own meaning of the term. But I leave it to you to figure out whether it's, you know, what you think. I mean, you can judge for yourself. Next, oh, these are fun. Morton Gould. He didn't call his pieces sinfoniettas. He Americanized them and called them symphonettes. And actually, there are 4 of them. And I think numbers 2 through 4 have been recorded. I don't think I've ever seen a recording of number 1, although someone might take a look. They're called the American Symphonette number, whatever. But the famous one is the Latin American Symphonet, which is just fabulous. Oh my goodness. It has a conga. Cha 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 boom. Oh God, it's marvelous. It's one of those fabulous Latin American 1950s. You expect to see a lady with a bowl of fruit on her head, you know, sort of slinking by. It's just fantastic. They are wonderful works. All of them are. Morton Gould wrote the most marvelous light music, meaning it was light, but it was written with the same craftsmanship and genius of the heaviest of heavy music. It's just terrific. Great stuff. And you can look at them. There's a recording of 3 of them on Naxos. Not my favorite recording of them, but, you know, it's okay. And a bunch on Albany. And the best Latin American Symphonet, I think, was a Bravanel with the Utah Symphony on Vanguard. But what the heck? Just listen to the Symphonettes. They are marvelous. Then there's the Prokofiev Symphonietta. This is a piece that very, very few people know, but thank goodness Nimi Yarvi recorded it on Chandos, and there are some other ones out there. You know, this is exactly what a Sinfonietta ought to be. It's a light symphony. And if you like Prokofiev from, say, like the Classical Symphony or his late stuff like the 7th Symphony, you're really going to enjoy the Sinfonietta. It's delightful. The music is just completely breezy, easy to listen to. No, you know, no special preparation necessary. But again, he's not pandering. It's not in any way bad music or anything like that. So the Prokofiev Symphonietta is wonderful. And then there is Lopez Grassa, the Portuguese composer, who I just did a review of a disc of his stuff on classicstoday.com, which you can go and read. And everybody can. It's not behind like the paywall or anything like that. It's not an insider review. And he wrote a very, very entertaining Sinfonietta, which you definitely should give a shot to. It's a homage to Haydn, which makes it even more interesting because there's a quotation in the middle of it, which is lots of fun. His style was somewhat thorny. It's kind of Hindemith-y in a way. You know, that is, it's expanded tonality. He did do some atonal stuff, but he was also influenced by folk music, and so it's really, you know, you could think maybe of like Bartók as well. It's a personal idiom, a very personal idiom, and the Sinfonietta is just delightful. It's just been recorded, so I had a chance to like toss it in the pile here. Then there's E.J. Moeran. Remember him? He wrote the Symphony in G minor, one of the great British symphonies of the interwar period. I think it came during the interwar period. If it didn't, it was one of the great British symphonies of the almost interwar period. Fabulous. And the Sinfonietta is marvelous. A wonderful work. Moeran would have been, had he lived long enough. You know, he died, he drowned, he was an alcoholic, he had all kinds of issues. But he wrote really good music. What he did write is really pretty splendid. And the Sinfonietta is a completely charming, perfect example, again, like the Prokofiev Symphonietta, a wonderful exemplar of the Sinfonietta form. It isn't as big as a symphony, it's more relaxed, but it's just as impeccably put together and just splendid to listen to. And it's been recorded a few times. And of course, who could forget Poulenc's Sinfonietta? Poulenc they asked him to do a symphony. He said, that's not my thing. I'm never going to do a symphony. And he started to write a string quartet, and that wasn't his thing because he didn't really like the sound of solo string instruments. He liked wind instruments. He liked their drier, sec quality. But somehow the whole thing got worked up into a sinfonietta. And the piece has gotten very little attention because Poulenc had disparaging things to say about it. And it hasn't been all that well recorded either. Until Jean-Luc Tango did it on Naxos, it's just the most wonderful performance because it's quick. It has the Poulencian qualities. It's zippy and spiky and rhythmic. And, the bottom line is if you play it like Poulenc, it comes off sounding marvelously. It is an extremely light and frothy piece. But, of course, we're talking about Poulenc, so what on earth do you expect? The Stabat Mater? No. It's a Sinfonietta, and it's a charming work, and it deserves to be better known than it is. So the Poulenc, and it's out there. I mean, it's out. It's been recorded a bunch of times. But for some reason, get the Naxos one. It just presents it in its best possible form, and you'll be charmed. I guarantee it. It's luscious and wonderful. Then, someone who you've all been telling me to talk about over and over and over. Frankly, well, I'll give you my frankly when I tell you what this is. Weinberg, Moise Weinberg, or Weinberg, or however we spell it this week. It changes every week, it seems, with a W, with a V, his name is Moses, or Moise, or Moisevich, or who knows. He was a contemporary of Shostakovich. He wrote a big pile of symphonies, tons of orchestral music, a scad of string quartets, a very, very serious composer, without a doubt, but also a very, very glum composer. And I get the distinct impression that a lot of the emphasis behind the push to hear more Weinberg, who I think is really a very good composer, don't get me wrong, but selectively, is this, is that wonderful, anything that's unusual or neglected must be marvelous, whether it is or it isn't. In the classical music universe, there is a tendency amongst those who are looking beyond the basic repertoire to overestimate or overpraise anything that's unusual or that's rare or that's new. And the real question isn't any of those things. The question is, how well does it survive? How well does it wear over time? And I don't know. The verdict is out on Weinberg. I've listened to every symphony that's been recorded. I find some of them quite marvelous and some of them to be just unbelievably desultory, very, very gloomy and somewhat thin and and the same thing with his chamber works. And you have to take them one at a time and see what you think. So he wrote a bunch of sinfoniettas. I list Sinfonietta number 1, and give it a chance and see what you think. The only way to know is to listen. And I would never suggest that we don't do that. We must listen. So listen to Weinberg, listen to his Sinfonietta. It may turn out, like the Penderecki Sinfoniettas, to be a very, very handy entree into his world more generally. And that's one of the wonderful things about Sinfoniettas. They make excellent business cards, calling cards to the rest of their works. So after Weinberg, there is Zemlinsky. Now, Zemlinsky's Sinfonietta is a very late work, very refined, very elegant. He was, so it's quasi tonal, sort of, basically, but it's very easy to follow. It's an incredibly rarefied piece of music, I think. Zemlinsky was known to be one of those fin de siècle, he wrote The Mermaid, and then he wrote the Lyric Symphony based on Das Lied von der Erde. He wrote these big, juicy operas and lots of decadent whatnot. But later he became something of a neoclassicist, and the Sinfonietta is his major late orchestral work. Incredibly, incredibly detailed and difficult work to play, actually. And it rewards repeated listening. You can really sort of sink your teeth into it, but there's nothing like light or frivolous about it at all. I don't think. It's a sinfonietta because it's short. It's not as big as a symphony. It's also not as expressively potent as his earlier works, his earlier symphonies, whether the romantic early ones or the more, modernistic ones. It is what it is. It's a very, very unique piece and well worth your time and attention. So after that, we have 2 two of them by Martinu. Martinu was a wonderful Sinfonietta guy because he was a concerto grosso guy, a neoclassical guy, and these are delicious. First, there is the Sinfonietta La Jolla, based or dedicated to the town of La Jolla, California, which had a music festival for which Martinu wrote this wonderful Sinfonietta. Oh, it's just delightful. It's one of his little, piano and chamber orchestra things. And it's irresistible. It really is. Unforgettably charming, full of good tunes. It's just marvelous. And after that, there's also the earlier Sinfonietta Giocosa. Now, the Sinfonietta Giocosa is a big work, and it's for piano and orchestra. It's a concertante work for piano and, again, chamber orchestra, strings, and just a handful of winds. And it's in 4 big movements. It's about 35 minutes long. How that became a Sinfonietta, and I have no idea. It's not a concerto, I guess, because it has 4 big movements, but it's not a symphony because it has the piano solo. It's really a concertante symphony, if you want to call it anything. But it's really, really a splendid piece with a virtuoso piano part. I mean, it's really a discovery. You'll really, really enjoy it. It's on that wonderful Chandos disc. I mean, Superphone did it. A bunch of people did it. But that Chandos disc conducted by Thomas Vasari with the Bournemouth Sinfonietta. The ensemble. Remember, their ensemble is called the Sinfoniettas. Remember the Longines Symphonet that used to do all those easy listening records that they sold on television for like $5.99? Remember that? So, yeah. That's a great Martinu disc. It has the Toccata e Due Canzoni and the Sinfonietta La Jolla, I think, and then the Sinfonietta Giocosa. Wonderful, wonderful piece. Next, we have 2 more to go. 2 more. Korngold, basically his largest pre-movie orchestral work. The Korngold Sinfonietta is a symphony. Let's not kid ourselves. It is a big, fat, rich, opulent, glorious behemoth. Well, behemoth, 45 minutes long, 40 minutes long. It's a big sucker. Really wonderful. Some of its themes got used in like later pieces by Korngold. He had a theme called the theme of the happy heart that pops up in just about everything he wrote. You hear it in the Sinfonietta. And he called it that, obviously, for German reasons, because he wasn't going to call it a symphony because he was like 7 when he wrote it. And, unless you were the childish Mozart when the symphonies hadn't really been invented yet, you could just call it a sinfonia because it was like a tiny little preludial thing. I mean, this is a big sucker, and he wasn't going to call it a symphony. It would have been trashed beyond belief in German circles had he called it a symphony. And his dad, who was a major music critic, Julius Korngold, probably said to him, "Son, let's play it safe. Just call it a Sinfonietta." But it's a big work. It's a very, very big work. And it's a serious work, even though it's extremely happy and jolly in its overall character. Wonderful music, though. You really should have the Korngold Sinfonietta. But However, I have not mentioned the ultimate Sinfonietta, and you know which one it is. Janáček's. Of course, it has to be the Janicex Infinietta. It is the most wonderfully indescribable, indefinable piece. He called it a Sinfonietta because he didn't want to call it a symphony. It is short. It's only about 22, 25 minutes long, but it has 5 movements, and it's scored for just an enormous, recklessly crazy, enormous orchestra, including 14 trumpets. I mean, and 9 band trumpets and 2 bass trumpets, and then 3 other trumpets in the orchestra, and just lots of everything else, 4 trombones and a tuba and bunches of woodwinds and just heaps of stuff everywhere. And it is the most glorious piece of music you've ever heard in your life. And Emerson, Lake and Palmer borrowed it for their song Knife Edge, the fanfares. Do 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 do, ba da da dum ba dum. That thing. Ya da 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 da, do 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 do. Ya da 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 da, do 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 do. We all know the Sinfonietta. No, we don't actually. I discovered it when I was in college, and I bought it because of the horrifying cover in the Raphael Kubelik Janáček thing. which is also sitting, one of them, I have like 40 copies of it, is like sitting over right there. It's Janáček, I think. Or is Janáček here? Well, somewhere around here. One of these shelves. And, oh my goodness, what a crazy thing that was. Oh, it's an amazing work. Absolutely amazing. So, there you have it, my friends. The entire list of 18 plus more Sinfoniettas. That's a lot of Sinfoniettas. That's a Sinfonietta fiesta. And I hope that they will keep you busy. Most of them are relatively short, except for like Korngold and Hindemith. And, well, Reger seems longer than it is, but that's okay. You have nothing but time on your hands. I know that because you're watching me. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.